falling players to the game of the new world order. Don't be caught unaware when the heads start rolling. No, it couldn't happen here. I know it wouldn't happen here. But I will not submit to authority of man. I'm alive, I'm awake. This is more than I can take. If you had an open door, would you kill a little more? Listen to the cries of the dead in the wake of the Sudan. Is there no one out there? I see blood in the sands of despair in Africa. Listen to the sound of applause in a chamber full of men selling out their people as they plan their assault on the heart of America. No, it couldn't happen here. I know it never happened here. I will not submit to authority of man. I'm alive, I'm awake. This is more than I can take.
And hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Double Cross Radio. I'm your host, Charles Horton, sometimes known as Chuck Horton, coming to you live from the above-ground bunker in Medford, Oregon, towering over the city. And as I look over the vast expanse, it's been a beautiful day. There's not a chemtrail in sight, a small breeze moving the leaves in the trees, and it's wonderful, and I have no idea what I'm going to talk about tonight. I had a guest lined up for tonight. It's a really interesting story, and it's not going to happen. And I'm just going to put it this way. There's some possible legal issues still up in the air, and until she's retained a lawyer to represent her, and until she has a full consultation with that person and gets his or her, I don't know if it's a man or woman lawyer, but until he gets their advice, she just doesn't feel it's prudent to come on the show and tell the story. Though I think eventually she will join us, and this story is a real tearjerker. And when indeed it does happen, it's going to be one that you'll want to make sure you have your whole family around to listen to, including all the people who don't believe that we're under tyranny, that we're no longer free, and that we're just conspiracy theorists and crazy people and stuff, because this is a person that just thought they could trust the system to protect them, and the system turned on them because they had assets. They don't want to go after the petty criminals. The petty criminal is going to cost them money to incarcerate. But this person had code violations. Whoa, code violations. We're talking revenue for the city. Yes. So we'll have more on that later. And yeah, it's a real sad story. Anyway, other things going on in the world these days. We had the conclusion of Bilderberg. I was partially right, partially wrong last week. The Bilderberg meeting was going on, as Jordan Page mentioned. He was our guest last week. And by the way, thanks again, Jordan. You're just awesome. I would have you on every other week or every week, or have you on every week and talk to you on the phone in between shows. You're just such an awesome person. You have so much insight into what's going on, and your songs have taught me so much about the world. They're just amazing. There's a reason why we buy his song every year to introduce our show. It's because that song is saying something really important. It's what our show is kind of about. And I could pester him incessantly because he's one of my favorite people to talk to. But he has other things to do in his life, and he has a family and 5 wonderful kids. And um, I'm happy just to have him on once or twice a year. It's amazing. But that was a great show. If any of you haven't heard that show, make sure you get a chance to listen to the recording. There's a link in the UCY it's their internet page, the web page. It has copies of all the archives. It was last week's show, and you just click on that and you can listen to it. Wait till after this show to click on it. And it also shows up on their YouTube channel, which has has some advantages and disadvantages. You get to see our logo. Has an advantage, got to be. And anyway, Jordan was awesome, and it was a great show. Eric Dubin liked it so much he shared it on his Silver Doctors website, and I got thousands of people listen to it. And I'm just thank you, Eric. You're an awesome friend, and I really appreciate that. And I know everybody at UCY appreciates the fact that you promoted that, and it's a wonderful gesture on your part. And I just think that it was great radio, and it was one of the fastest hours of my life. I wish it could have lasted a little longer. I think Jordan had a lot more to say, and I think I had more questions to ask and just more conversation to engage him in. And we'll save that for the next time he's on. In the meantime, I just want to remind all you people that if you go to Jordan Page's webpage, you can purchase any or all of his music. You can listen to previews, what they sound like, what the songs are. I have yet to find, there's songs I like better than others, but I've yet to find a song that I don't like. And so I want to make sure we keep going on that vein. A couple of weeks ago, Eric Dubin, who I just mentioned a few seconds ago, he was on with me, and we were talking about a cashless society and kind of what would be the point of that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's inevitable or we have a choice. And we were trying to take our emotional, our biases and everything else out of the discussion for part of it, and just lay it all out there, the facts that we could discover at this point in time. Eric had articles written, I think it was about 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, that explained, or the author's point was that a cashless society was an inevitable thing, and we should accept it. And certainly there are a lot of parts to using cards, debit cards, and credit cards, and gift cards, and whatever. There's some benefits to that is convenience is really more than benefits. And I don't think we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I certainly think that those things are worthwhile. And whereas nobody's being forced to use those things exclusively, they're a good thing that they have to compete with cash in order to be used and to be accepted. And now the banks make a little bit of money on those products. And as long as everything's voluntary, I have no problem with that. I start to have a problem when things become more mandatory, where suddenly cash is not, cash becomes something that makes you a suspect, to being a criminal, to being a drug dealer, to being someone who pays their employees under the table, someone who might be buying raw milk. So, the reason I bring all this up is I shared an article on our Facebook page just a few minutes ago, and after I shared it, I found out that, oh my gosh, some IP troll has had it taken down because the person who originally copied it onto Facebook did so without the author's permission, and I guess it was kind of copyrighted. It came out of a news site or whatever, and And so you couldn't go and look at all those different professions. That the title of 67 professions that you can do to earn cash and avoid taxation, basically, is what it was. And of course, I think leading the list on those things are maybe one of the oldest professions. I think that there's a lot, that's a cash profession. You pay in advance. You get a lot of, it's night work generally, but if you've got some ambition and you relatively good looking and have nicely mannered, whatever, you could become a pretty high priced escort for some rich people that are so shallow and imperfect that the only way they can attract someone is with a big wad of money. You could probably make a pretty good living there, tax free, because I don't think anyone's going to file a 1099 on you for, I paid her this much money. She's my escort, my prostitute, my paid hooker, my whatever. So there's that. And I don't know if that was on the list or not, because I was going to read to see if that was there. And I think the other really high paid profession you could have is being some kind of government official, where you have the power of over people's lives, like a code enforcer for a city in Southern Oregon, where you can just make someone's life miserable just by going through and finding code violations. And I tell you, there are code violations in just about every business that's out there. The people that do things that aren't quote unquote acceptable, they're dangerous in one way or another. And some of them might be really dangerous, and some of them might be dangerous every 1,000 years or so. And some of them might be things that, really the person that's doing this is just stupid, and people who are customers of that store and aren't aware of this stuff, or, it's covered up somehow. I feel sorry for you. Because something happens, if it causes a spark and everything burns down and you get caught inside and there's a riot and you get stampled to death, that could be horrible. And so there's reason to enforce some codes, but there's other codes that I just wonder what are they thinking. And I'm going to tell a little story on myself. As I've been proudly announcing for the past several weeks, I am now owner of a liquor store in Southern Oregon. And in Oregon, we have it's called a control state. And what that means is that the state owns all the hard alcohol, and you bid to become a licensed agent. And when a store owner wants to retire, or he's tired of doing this business, wants to do something else, then people put in their bids to purchase that store off. And the state measures your economic viability, whether you're indeed able to do that financially. They measure your experience in retail, which I have a lot of. I'm an old dude, and I had my own store in a local mall for 21 years. And so I've had a lot of experience there. I was able, this was my second attempt at purchasing a liquor store. The first time I washed out, and I was pretty discouraged, saying, wow, this is a lot tougher than I thought it would be. But I was ready for this one a little bit better, and I prepared myself better, and I was able to be awarded this store, and I was very thankful to have that. What was I going to say? Where was I going with all this? Oh, yes. And so in Oregon, being a controlled state, as an agent of the state, I bring their product, which would be the hard alcohol, into my store, and they don't charge me any money for it. It just sits there on the shelf, and as soon as I sell it, I have to give them the money. So every day we have our gross sales and things that are not alcoholic products that I'm permitted to sell, and they have a list of things that I'm not permitted to sell. But those items, I'm able to keep the money from selling those items. So if I'm selling a 2-liter bottle of Coke to go with that fifth of rum, the money from the Coke is mine, and then the money from the rum belongs to the state. And for taking care of all this for the state, they pay me a modest, and it's very modest, um, I guess you'd call it a commission. And anyway, that's how the system works here. And you can make a fairly decent living because the state makes sure that you have enough business that you can make a fairly decent living. And then the way you can make more money is by kind of cutting expenses, by not doing everything exactly the right way, but kind of doing it the cheapest way. And so quite a few of the people who have stores in the state that are engaged in this, I think if you kind of can go behind the walls a little bit, you'll see a lot of stuff that's kind of not really done the proper way. They've done the cheap way. And then they just put some paint over the wall and throw some shelves up in front of it, and it's good. Well, and I'm not downgrading all the guys that own liquor stores in the state of Oregon. It's if you go, and you get really first class contractors and everything, they could take you 10 or 15 years to pay back to get a good return on the money you invest in a store. If you had to take a loan out or if you just took out savings to do this. And so in order to make this pay off at a reasonable rate, you have to maybe cut some corners in some of the things you do. So there's that. But I have seen what happens when you have substandard work, and so I'm kind of a stickler for quality in terms of the getting craftsmen in to do the work and making sure you have licensed contractors and that things that are important that you do it the right way, and things that don't matter so much, well, that we can let that go a little bit. But anyway, our guest that we were going to have on tonight, there's someone that ran afoul of some code violations, and there's things that are kind of minor, like they didn't have the right kind of smoke detector and stuff like that. It wasn't stuff that's going to cost somebody their life, or it probably won't. I mean, the smoke detector could be an important problem. And to let you know, they really didn't have any qualms about fixing most of this stuff, because they say, "Oh yeah, we should probably do that. We should probably do that." But it didn't end. It hasn't ended yet, and it doesn't look like it's going to end very well for them. They may be forced to put in a complete sprinkler system in their home because it's attached to a business, and it's really kind of semi-ridiculous. And they have these building codes that are based on standards. And for my store, I had a main store area, which I was able to assume the lease and actually renegotiate a new lease with the landlord. I also leased the space next to my store, as the previous owner did, and that space was used to warehouse excess inventory. It's a fairly high volume store. We get one delivery a week, and we need to order enough alcohol so we don't run out of things. And so in a routine week, we'll get somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 worth of alcohol, and that's a lot, and needs a place to put it, so we had to have a storeroom. And as one of the things that I got, the state of Oregon is trying to bring more free market principles into their existence, which I really tip my hat to them for that. They really are not. I kind of joke with them sometimes that the first C in the OLCC stands for control, and it should be in a larger font. But it's just jokingly. I'm only semi-serious with it. It's they really are trying to become less controlling and try and interject more and more free market principles into how the alcohol is done, without them giving up ownership of the alcohol, because that's the major tax revenue source for the state of Oregon. I think last year they returned $450 million to the state of Oregon in alcohol tax revenue. And that's voluntary tax, kind of. I mean, people like the product; they're willing to pay. That markup that's put on there is you could call it a profit, but it's really a tax. The alcohol in Oregon costs a little bit more than it does right across the border in California. Although there are places in California, like downtown LA, where it costs quite a bit more. But California is more of a, they have, and this is really hard for me to fathom, but California's stance on alcohol is a lot more free market than Oregon's, which is, like I said, that's just, So that must have been established during a more enlightened era for the California. Anyway, back to my story. I had this brilliant brainstorm idea that the state of Oregon, in relaxing their policies, had made it such that you could open up your store to beer and wine sales, which had been prohibited for a hard liquor alcohol store over a certain volume. If you were selling over like $1.5 million a year, you couldn't do that. But they just changed that policy and said that anybody who wanted to could also sell beer and wine. And I realized that half of that storage space I had next door wasn't really being used. We had a bunch of junk piled in there, and if we just moved some of the stuff that was on the floor up on shelves, we could actually store more alcohol than we were storing presently. We could also store all the mixers and pop. We could store all the sacks and other sales things we needed to. We could store just about everything in the store if we would just get it up off the floor and use some of the space above 3 feet that we were paying rent on that we weren't using. So we decided, hey, that's a great idea. We can do that, and we can open this up and we can have an additional retail opportunity. Well, to do this, I had to put up a barrier wall between where we're going to warehouse the stuff and where we're going to have like our showroom for table wines and Oregon Microbrew, which if you haven't ever tasted Oregon Microbrew, it's to die for. They're the best beers made in America, bar none. And they're real beers. They're not beer-flavored carbonated water like they make in St. Louis. It's pulled around town on these big white horses. Anyway, to build this barrier wall, the city of Medford, they decided that I needed to have a building permit to build a 24-foot wall, 10 feet high, that supports no load and only is there as a barrier to keep people from going from the store area into the warehouse area. And we also have shelves attached to it, and it does not support the load of the shelves. The shelves are self-supporting. It just keeps the shelves from wiggling, so they're stable. So there's very little force operating on that wall. But they thought that they still needed to have a building permit issued. So I made a real crude drawing, showed them where the wall was going to be, and they said, well, this isn't good enough. You have to have architectural drawings. You have to submit it to through our computer plan service, whatever. They have a deal, you put the files in. So luckily I had a friend who was an architect. He went down, he said, oh, I'll do that for you, Chuck. It's really simple. It's just a small drafting job. So they plotted it out for me and submitted it. And then I waited 8 weeks. I waited 8 weeks for them to approve a barrier wall. I called at one time and I said, what's holding this up? And they said, gosh, I don't know. That's a really old number. This should have been done a long time ago. And I said, really? And he said, let me transfer you to this person. He knows more about these things than I do. So he transferred me to the next guy. And this guy says, wow, I can't, I don't know. I'm supposed to get the stuff that has plumbing and you have no plumbing. I said, no electrical either. It's just a barrier wall. That's strange. Well, you guys can go ahead and build it. Just don't cover anything up because we'll need to inspect it. I says, why? It's just a barrier wall. Well, we have to make sure that it's just a barrier wall. You think I'm going to hide something in it, or I'm going to have a secret entrance to a tunnel that goes underground? And but I didn't say any of those things. I'm just thinking the things in my mind. What is going on here? So anyway, we waited our 8 weeks. We finally got ready. We called the inspector. The guy came out and he's looking at us and says, why am I here? He doesn't even know why he's there. So he signs off on it and says, I don't know why they made you get a building permit for this. But I know why they did. It's because government, when you give them this power, they're going to use it every time they can to enhance their revenues. And that's just how it is. And for me, building this barrier wall, which probably cost me, I was saying probably in the neighborhood of $500 with materials, and I had hired a guy to do it. It may have been a little less than that, maybe between $400 and $500. You know, drywall doesn't grow on trees, unlike the lumber that it's put on. And then you have to put it on. You have to tape it and put a finish on it, and then paint it, and it added up. But the permit cost $800. So a $400 wall had to have an $800 permit, and the permit was the value of that was determined through the value of the permit was determined the square footage of the whole store. Even though I'm just putting one wall there, it's whatever. So I'm thinking, wow, things got to be really rough down there at the city offices if this is what they do, and they go out there and they just steal money from their local citizens because they don't have enough money because the economy is so rotten. And I started thinking, just how rotten is it? Well, we have a record number of Americans not working right now. It's the highest number of available workers that aren't working that this country has ever had. We have the highest number of people on food stamps that this country has ever had. We have banks that are recording record profits on income they get from buying bonds with money that they borrow at 0% interest from the Federal Reserve. They buy bonds and they make 0.5 to 1% on them, and they're buying trillions of dollars worth of debt and making 1 or 2% at the most, and they're this money that they're borrowing at 0% interest. I don't even know if it ever has to be paid back, and it's just creating income for them. So those stocks have kind of pulled the stock market up with them, and there's really nothing being produced that's pulling that up. It's just this, there's less and less actual wealth being produced for all this growth in the value of the stock market. There's really nothing there. This is so overvalued, you cannot believe it. And I don't know of a simpler way to, this is not like the balloon. This is like the mother of all balloons. Bubbles. I meant bubbles, not balloons. And a similar thing happened in the Great Depression. They were inflating the money supply, and they weren't doing it by just throwing money out there out of a helicopter, like Helicopter Ben. What they were doing is they were actually sending money overseas to Europe so they could buy United States farm products. That's kind of a line of credit only usable when you're buying, wheat and poultry and meat and whatever from the United States. So then they would buy that, and that extra money would come in. But really nothing was being produced from that money. The Federal Reserve was just creating the money, sending it overseas, and they had this kind of like a line of credit, but they could only use it to buy American products. And so it would come back to America, and it kept on building and building and building. They called those the Roaring '20s. And everybody thought that was a wonderful time economically. A lot of wealth being produced. There really wasn't wealth being produced. It was a bubble. It was being produced by the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve said there was no inflation because prices were stable. But prices weren't stable. Farmers were investing more and more money into growing more and more crops because they were making some money there. And so there was the land that was marginally fertile was being plowed up and planted, and there wasn't really enough water There wasn't really enough really good soil. There wasn't enough irrigation. And the wind started to blow in the spring, and the land was so dry they had what they call the Dust Bowl, and they lost literally tons of really fertile topsoil. It just blew away. And when you say, well, this wasn't inflation that caused it, it really was. It was resources being malinvested into products that really wouldn't have been in demand if money hadn't been given away to people in Europe to buy the farm products. Well, eventually the European farmers got back on their feet and started producing things, and that program disappeared, and the farmers went all broke. A lot of them lost their farms. The lucky ones didn't borrow money to grow more crops and didn't mortgage their farm to do that, and they were able to keep their farms. But it was really a terrible thing, and that was a precursor to the crash in 1929. And they should have saw that as a canary in a coal mine. That, hey, this isn't a sustainable economy. This doesn't work. But they didn't. And you can look back and say, oh, dummies, why couldn't they see this happening? Well, the same thing's happening right now, and hardly anybody knows about it. I tip my hat to Hal Anthony. His show comes on before ours. That guy, he could, what he says, he is right on his message. He says the same thing I'm saying. He says, Drew and I, when we first came on, we were talking about this, and one of our first guests was a wild man. I forget his name. It doesn't matter. And he was a stock market advisor and analyst, and he's a pretty shrewd guy. And he said, well, no, the stock market's going to go up right now. And he was right. It did go up. It's gone up for 2 years. It's gone up. It's skyrocketed. And it might go up a few more days, months, maybe even into next year sometime. It can't go up much further. There's a lot of, it's having trouble making new highs now. There's not as many buyers as there once were. It's tending to get to the point where there's more people wanting to sell than there are people wanting to buy. And when that happens, the people that want to buy might just stop buying altogether, and they have what they call a flash crash. And the value of the market can just go away almost overnight. And if you don't think it can happen, I think you should do some research on, there was a flash crash during the Reagan administration. The 1929 started with a flash crash. It isn't computer generated. It isn't caused by machines or people doing crazy trading programs. No, it's caused by the fact that the people that are willing to buy the shares or the stock just disappear. They stop buying. And when it starts to go down, more people stop buying because they say, I don't want to buy something on the way down. And so all the support for it just disappears. There's no real wealth being generated. They're all speculators. And because there's no real wealth being generated, there's nothing to hold that stock up, and it's going to crash really hard. And I hope a lot of you out there you're not living on pensions that you get a check every month from that rely on the value of the stock market. You might have had a good last 2 years, but I hope I'm wrong when I say that you might want to start doing some investigations on your own into the viability of the present situation. Because I think it's a seriously overvalued stock market about ready to crash. Daniel Estulin, he's one of the people that crusades against the Bilderbergers, and he was interviewed yesterday by Alex Jones, and it's on YouTube. And I really highly recommend everybody out there listening to this that you find that interview and you listen to it. And if you don't get it all, listen to it again and listen to it again, especially the parts where Daniel Estulin is talking, because he made a ton of sense. Alex Jones comments he puts in there. Not to say this is an Alex Jones interview. This one was relatively really good because Alex kind of got quiet and let Daniel talk. And it was amazing what he had to say. And basically says the whole banking system and the whole world, and that includes the United States, that the central banks, they basically own each other's debt. And all it'll take is one of these major banks to fail, not even fail severely, but just start to fail, and all the rest of them will come down to every nation's central bank all the big European central banks, the Fed in the United States, the Canadian version of the Fed, any country that has a central bank is probably going to come. It's kind of going to fall. It's going to fail. Now, what's that going to look like? Well, first of all, welcome back to our show about the cashless society. First of all, if they've enacted laws about a cashless society, you can just kiss any money you had in that bank goodbye. There's no way you're getting any of it. If you do, it's going to be in some kind of a crazy form that it's really difficult to use, or it probably has very little purchasing power. I think cash will still be used for quite some time after a crash like this nature, if it's caused by a banking failure. But if your cash is locked up in the bank and the banks are closed, how are you going to get at it? If you manage to get your money out of the stock market and you put it all in the bank, you've gone out of the frying pan into the fire. Daniel Estlund says people in Europe are closing out their accounts. They're taking tens of thousands of dollars in euros and they're hiding them in their house. They're pulling up floorboards and digging holes and putting them in tin cans under their floorboards. It's amazing. They're doing this because they don't think the banks are and obviously it isn't a huge majority, because under fractional reserve banking, if it was like 10% of deposits, those banks would fail. It's probably a small percentage, so 1 or 2%. So the banks are kind of nervous, but they're able to deal with this. But I want you to know that banks do not have cash in their accounts. Today, I put in a change order for my business because almost every bottle in our store is so many dollars and 95 cents. We go through a lot of nickels. Guess what? The bank, which the state makes us bank at, that's another one of the things they control. You have to bank at the closest bank to your store. But the bank that was closest to my store ran out of nickels, and they weren't going to have them till late in the afternoon. And they may have gotten them. I left before the bank closed. I left the store. They may have gotten them, or they may and not called, or they may not have gotten them. I don't know. Or they may have gotten them and called after I left. But the point is, I would think that it would be good business practice to have enough cash on hand to take care of the needs of your customers. That would seem to me to be prudent. And to be fair, this is only a branch. It's not the main office for the bank. But that's a hassle to go all the way down there. But it points out that just because you have $10,000 in the bank doesn't mean that they're going to give you $10,000 in cash when you need it. I remember Drew telling the story that when he moved from Southern Oregon area up to Seattle, he went into the bank and wanted to close his account and withdraw his money, and they didn't have enough to give it to him. His request was more than they had in the bank that day. He says, "You're going to have to give us a day to get this together." So they had to go out and borrow money to pay, to give him the money that that he had deposited in there. This was a long time ago when the banks were in much better shape. I tell you, today they are not in good shape at all. They're zombie banks, and they're not all of them are. Some of them are healthier than others, but they're trying to do everything they can do to cut expenses because they can't operate at a loss. They're barely hanging on. They've lost so much money with their failed investments in housing markets and such in 2008 that they have never regained full health from that point on. They have been only restored by the Federal Reserve transferring money into their accounts that they had to buy treasury bonds or treasury bills with. And that didn't help them with their fractional reserve problems that they have, because they don't have enough deposits on hand to cover a withdrawal problem. So if they were healthy under the old ways, or under I think this is still the current system, if they have 10% on deposit should have 10% of the deposits on hand. But if 1 in 10 people come to the bank and want to withdraw their money, that they're gonna have a run on the bank, or at least call them panics. They still should, because everybody starts to panic. What? I can't get my money out. What? Well, at that point, the bank has to close its doors. You can't give people any. It doesn't have any more money. It's all the money that they had is gone. Now they get payments every so often from people that have loans, and they can convert that or pay off some of the depositors. Pay off some of the depositors from that. But it's not going to be able. They're not going to be able to pay everybody at once. And so it's kind of well, here's your share of this profit we made this week. Here's your share of, a woman that is a customer at my store says she went through that when she was a young girl. She lived in Hawaii, and she had saved all her babysitting money, and she had worked jobs, working in tourist things, and she had saved up enough money to buy a car, and she wanted to go out there and get cash in about a week before she was going to go and get her money and go buy a car. The bank was closed, and it took her 11 years to get all of her money back out of that bank. And this was an FDIC insured bank, and she didn't have that much in there. 11 years. So, and I also want to point out that FDIC, if you're dependent on FDIC, you better be willing to accept 2 or 3 cents on the dollar. That's all they have to cover what's in the bank. And it might be much worse than that. So don't be relying on somebody else to save your bank, and you better take care of your own stuff and guard your own assets. And I wouldn't put all your money in the bank. You better have, you're going to need some in the bank to make your house payment, pay your electric bill, all those sorts of things. And that's, I'm not telling you to take your money out and walk around town and pay everybody in cash. I don't think that's necessarily smart either. It's not a good use of your time. It's kind of risky. People know that you're walking around with thousands of dollars on you. They might just say, well, let's just knock this guy off and take the money. So you still need to keep some money in the bank just to do your business. But I would close out any savings accounts you had. It's not doing you any good. I would buy gold. At least you're going to preserve. You may not make any money on the gold, but you're going to preserve the purchasing power. I think we're heading towards a big deflation. And the deflation, the economy is going to shrink some. The value of everything is going down because there'll be a lot of liquidation. And that may include gold and silver. They may go down in value, but their purchasing power will rise because they will not go down as fast as the commodities that you can purchase with them. Certainly, the value of the dollar is going to go down the fastest. Now, there's several things that could happen in the near future that could trigger this. Among them are, let's see how much time I got left. I got about 17 minutes, about 15 minutes with the exit song. Among the things, one of the triggers is in the near future, China is going to announce the amount of gold that they're holding. And some analysts have speculated that this number is going to shock the world. They're going to wonder, how did you get this much gold? And they're going to wonder, where did it come from? And they're going to demand the countries that have the most gold do an audit of their gold, or they're going to dump their currency because there's nothing there anymore. So one of the countries really at risk is the United States. And I'm not sure if there's even any gold left in the United States. Germany asked for their gold back, and they said, we'll get it back to you in about 8 years. What? So I'm not sure there's any gold in Fort Knox anymore. I'm not sure exactly the time frame on this. I believe it was sometime possibly in this fall, maybe September, when China was going to make this announcement. I think that if I were you, I'd be kind of watching that, because that could have and I hope I'm wrong again, but it could be very serious if it shakes up the world, if it startles the world, and all of a sudden people wonder, why are we holding dollars? Why aren't we holding the yuan? I think I say that right. It's Y-U-A-N. And if that happens, if they start getting rid of their dollars and buying the Chinese currency, then you're going to see maybe some price increases that maybe could signify hyperinflation, because there's going to be literally, they said that 80% of the money the dollars in circulation circulate outside the borders of this country. And when no one wants that money anymore, they're gonna send it back to this country and getting whatever they can out of it. So if they say, I don't want these dollars anymore, what do they have? Oh, they're selling beachfront property in Arizona. I'll buy some of that. I mean, they're gonna be wanting to try to buy anything they can to get out of the dollar, because they know it is worth nothing. At least that beachfront property, even though they know couldn't exist, there might be another sucker out there that'll buy it, and they'll give them something in Chinese currency instead of American currency. So they're going to be trying to find commodities that they can exchange their dollars for. That is going to drive up that. That price bidding is going to drive up the price of American goods, and it's going to go up really, really fast, folks. We could see the whole thing. Well, once this starts, it generally takes less than a year, about 9 or 10 months before your currency collapses entirely. And this could happen, like I said, as early as September. I'll say that again. This could happen as early as September. It might happen after next year's election. I mean, the Chinese might hold off because they want to. I mean, maybe they can make a deal with a Bush or a Clinton. I mean, they made deals with the Clintons before, so maybe they can wheel and deal with them. And I'm not saying this is a good thing, because any of these wheeling and dealings they do is going to be very good for China, very bad for the United States. So, I think that's a long story, kind of an infomercial about my store, and kind of a frustration about our local governments and how they impede the generation of wealth. But it's the generation of wealth that brings wealth to your society. And instead of that, our economies are kind of measured by this phantom statistic called GDP. Well, GDP is so full of crap, it's hard to make heads or tails of it. It doesn't give you a very good picture of anything. A person that is hired to dig a hole and then fill it back in with dirt and tamp it down and restore it so it looks exactly like it did before he dug the hole, well, that person gets paid for doing that job. He produced nothing. He destroyed whatever it was he produced. He produced a hole and then he filled it in. He got paid for creating the hole and for destroying the hole. And so that added to the GDP, but there's no wealth created by that. Nobody benefited from it. And that's pretty much all government does. It only fills in the holes. So government is the destructor of wealth, destroyer. And they do it in a lot of different ways. They do it through taxation. They do it through regulation. They do it through engaging us in war. They do it through many, many, many things that they shouldn't be engaged in. They should let people be free. But they don't. And so we have a fraction of the capacity to produce that we should have. Now, having said that, we still make things in this country, and we still have some factories. We still have, there's Caterpillar still has a big factory here. They just laid off a bunch of people, but they're still producing something. But a lot of these multinational corporations have fled the United States for countries with regulations they can live with, lower tax rates, cheaper labor, and they really have no choice. If they stay here, they're going to be competing with a company that it doesn't have to be in the United States, but a company that has now their direct competition that has set up camp in the place that they were going to go to. So it's either go there and stay alive, or they stay here and wither on the vine. A lot of corporations have even become more proactive, and they've kind of taken to trying to really influence government. They've put their best executives, they try and get them into governmental positions where they can make decisions that are beneficial to those corporations. A lot of people call this fascism, and it is. Look up all the stuff about Monsanto and how they've infiltrated the FDA, and then you can see how Roundup continues to be qualified as a safe herbicide when we know that it isn't. We know that it causes cancer. And there's someone, a whistleblower that used to work at Monsanto, has released information that they've known that it's cancer causing for over 30 years. And they're putting it out on the market for Americans to use, knowing that it'll increase the rate of cancer and death rate will go up due to their product. But the FDA contends it's still safe because they're full of ex-Monsanto employees. So that's how that works. In the meantime, the wealth of the nation isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in what you produce. And all we're producing is dollars printed on paper. It's just paper with ink on it. And what's the real value of that if you print so much of it that it's lost its value? And for a long time, by printing those dollars and creating money out of thin air, we were able to balance our trade deficits because we would trade these pieces of paper with ink on them for goods and services that other countries would send to us. And it was a really good deal for the United States for a while, but the rest of the world is awash in dollars, and they're tired of supporting Americans at a lifestyle that they only wish they could have, and they're looking to other alternatives. And plus, central banks around the world are about ready to crash, and I think people that have been in places where they've crashed more than once in their lifetime understand that it's another day of reckoning's coming, and they're battening down the hatches, and it's going to start in those countries first. You can look for maybe Argentina, Greece, places like that to just be on their lips very, very soon. In fact, I think Greece is going to be. Hang on a second. We have an urgent message from my wife. Just a moment.
You come immediately.
We have a spider alert in our house, so that is really good radio. We're going to have to take care of the spider. The show has about 5 more minutes, so I hope the spider is. But they're shrieking downstairs. Should have gone into the soundproof booth, the cone of silence, to do the show tonight, and I wouldn't hear all the shrieking from the spider. Anyway, I just think it's really prudent that you take a real pessimistic view and hope that you're wrong about our present economy. There are no good signs of life. I take that back. There was one good sign. The overvalued price of oil is starting to come back to reality. But it hasn't gone down to where it should be. And that, even though if it happens, it will not resuscitate your economy. It will only forestall things for a little while because it'll allow you to spread your resources out for a little bit longer. As long as your economy is based on printing money, it has to have a day of reckoning. It can't go on like that forever. And it won't. That's one of the rules of economics. Things that can't go on forever won't. That's true. That's one of the. I think it was one of the Austrians said that. I think the exact quote is something that cannot go on forever will not. But anyway, that's tonight's show. It's kind of been just off the top of my head because the show I had planned was and we'll still have that show sometime in the near future. I hope. But that show got scuttled in the last couple hours before the showtime, and I think the news is out there. You guys can go out and read it. You can. I tell you again, check out that interview on the Alex Jones YouTube channel, Daniel Estulin. It is full of really good information. I had to listen to it a couple times because I kept on thinking about things he said, and I'd miss the next thing he said, so I'd have to go back and start again. It's full of really, really, really good information and stuff that you don't hear, and you don't read it in newspapers, you don't hear on the nightly news, you certainly don't hear in the mainstream radio. It's something that's being ignored. They don't want you people to know the truth because they know it will scare the crap out of you. And they think they can keep this going if they just keep you accepting this false reality and let your normalcy bias let you sleep through all this stuff that's going on around you until it's too late. And then they'll have purchased all the property and commodity hard assets with the money they create out of thin air, and then they'll make the money worth nothing, and you'll be left with a bag full of money that you might be able to use to wallpaper your house, except that, it's been foreclosed by the bank. How about that? Okay, it's been a pleasure talking to all you tonight. Thank you for listening to my droning on and on and on. I know this wasn't nearly as good. This wasn't it wasn't even close to as good as last week's with Jordan Page. So as soon as you get a chance, check out that show, because I was really proud of that show, and Jordan had a lot of great things to say. Okay. Anyway, this has been Chuck Horton, Double Cross Radio. I'm getting close to signing off. I've got the dog here who wants to go for a walk. Yeah, he does. And there's a spider downstairs. I got all these other things I have to devote my time to. So good night for another Thursday night. Be sure and tune in next week. We're either going to have this special guest on, or we'll get somebody else that's really interesting, or I'll find something to talk about, some more economic fear porn. I love that because I'm going to keep talking about this stuff until people understand how dire our situation is. It's not happy at all. Let's see. Someone in chat says he wants to know what the Chinese think about Bilderberger. Well, I don't think there were any Chinese people there, but I do know that there were representatives from HSBC, which is a money laundering bank, and they were there with money regulators from all over Europe, and they were making secret deals and secret meetings, and that should be illegal if it isn't. I'm pretty sure it is illegal. And I think the Chinese say, well, these guys, they're all going to fall apart. We don't have to worry about this. We will take over when they've collapsed from within. So that's what I think the Chinese think about it, but I don't know. Maybe I think they're smarter than that. I don't know. So I'm waiting for the music to come on. Can you tell I'm stretching? I'm kind of waiting for the music to come on. Is it show out there? There it is. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week, 7 to 8 p.m. Pacific time, only on UCY. This is Double Cross Radio. This is Chuck Horton signing off.
Time